The first thing I noticed was the folding table set up at the entrance to my solar field. It was a Saturday morning in late September, the air still cool enough that the dew hadn't burned off the panels, and I was walking down from the workshop with a thermos of coffee when I saw the white SUV parked on the gravel access road. The table had a green tablecloth, a stack of brochures, and a laminated sign that read, Willow Creek HOA Sustainability Program, Community Solar Tour. A woman I recognized as Karen Devereaux, the HOA president, was standing behind the table with a clipboard, talking to a couple from the new development on the other side of the ridge. She was pointing at my panels. She was pointing at my panels like she owned them. I stopped walking about 50 feet away and just watched. The couple nodded along. Karen gestured toward the inverter shed, and then she handed them each a brochure. The brochures had the HOA logo on them. The HOA logo, printed above a photograph of my solar field. I took a picture with my phone before I said a single word. Then I walked up slowly, coffee still warm in my hand, and waited for the couple to leave. Karen saw me coming and her smile tightened just slightly, the way a person's face adjusts when they're calculating how much performance they need to maintain. She was in her late 50s, with the kind of polished confidence that comes from years of people not questioning her authority. Blonde hair, expensive sunglasses pushed up on her head, a linen blouse that probably cost more than my first solar inverter. She had been HOA president for 3 years, and in that time she had transformed the board from a sleepy group of retirees into what she called a progressive community leadership team. I called it something else in private. Marcus, she said, her voice warm and professional. Good morning. We're just finishing up the first tour of the day. I looked at the table. I looked at the brochures. I looked at the laminated sign. Then I looked at Karen. What tour? She gestured toward the panels, a sweep of her hand that took in all 4 acres of ground-mounted solar arrays. The inverter shed, the battery storage unit, and the transformer that connected everything to my private meter. The Community Solar Tour. It's part of our new sustainability initiative. The board voted last month to include the solar field in the HOA's Green Community Credit Program. Residents can now purchase sustainability credits that offset their carbon footprint, and the proceeds go toward maintaining the panels and expanding the program. She said it like she was reading from a press release. I took a sip of coffee. Karen, this is my solar field. Her smile didn't waver. The board reviewed the covenants, Marcus. The solar field sits on a parcel that falls within the HOA's jurisdiction, and the Community Benefit Clause allows us to designate shared resources for sustainability purposes. It's all in the documentation. We sent a letter last month. I had received no letter. I told her that. She tilted her head slightly, the way you might tilt your head at a child who doesn't understand how the world works. I'm sure it was mailed. Perhaps you misplaced it. In any case, the program is active. We have 3 more tours scheduled today, and the first batch of credits has already been sold to 17 households. 17 households? She had already sold credits from my solar field to 17 households. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I took another picture of the table, the brochures, the sign, and Karen's face. Then I said, I'd like a copy of that letter, and the board vote, and the documentation you mentioned. Of course, she said, still smiling. Transparency is very important to us. I walked back to my workshop without another word. The coffee was still warm, but my hands were cold. I sat down at my workbench, opened my laptop, and started a new folder on my desktop. I named it HOA Solar Fraud. Then I called my accountant. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I'm always curious about who's listening to these stories, and whether you've ever had a neighbor decide that your property belonged to the community. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 42 years old, and I own a small electrical contracting business that I built from nothing after I left the Navy. 12 years ago, I bought 47 acres of old farmland about 20 minutes outside of town, back when the land was cheap and the only neighbors were coyotes and a few stubborn oak trees. I built my workshop first, a steel frame building with a concrete floor and enough space for my equipment, my projects, and the quiet I needed after years of living on ships and bases. Then I built 3 small rental cabins near the creek, the kind of places that weekenders from the city would pay good money to stay in, with porches and wood stoves and no televisions. The solar field came later. I installed it myself over 2 years, panel by panel, rack by rack, inverter by inverter. 4 acres of ground-mounted arrays, a battery storage system, and a private interconnection with the utility company. The field generated enough power to run my workshop, my house, and all 3 cabins, with surplus that I sold back to the grid through a net metering agreement that was registered in my name, on my meter, under my account number. The solar field was not a hobby. It was not a community amenity. It was a carefully engineered private power plant that had cost me $87,000 in equipment and 2 years of my life, and it was the reason my electric bill was negative most months. The reason I had built it, the reason I had spent those 2 years sweating in the sun and running conduit and reading inverter manuals until my eyes blurred, was my daughter. Her name was Elena. She died when she was 7 years old, from a rare autoimmune disorder that took her slowly over 18 months. The hospital bills nearly destroyed me. The grief did destroy me, for a while. When I finally started to put myself back together, I bought this land because I needed something to build, something that would last, something that would make clean energy and save money and run quietly under the sun long after I was gone. I named the solar field Elena's Array. It's not on any official document. I never told anyone that name, but every morning when I walk out to check the inverters and see the panels tilting toward the sunrise, I think of her. So when Karen Devereaux stood behind her folding table and pointed at my panels and told strangers that they were part of the HOA's Green Community Credit Program, she wasn't just stealing electricity. She was stealing from a dead child's memorial, and she had no idea. The Willow Creek HOA had existed for about 15 years, covering the newer subdivision that had been built on the old Henderson farm and a few dozen custom homes scattered along the ridge. My property was adjacent to the HOA boundary, but not inside it. I had checked that before I bought the land. I had checked it again when I installed the solar field. The HOA covenants did not apply to my parcel, my workshop, my cabins, or my panels. Karen Devereaux either didn't know that or didn't care. I was betting on the second option. The next morning, I drove into town and visited the county recorder's office. I pulled my deed, my parcel map, and the recorded plat for the Willow Creek subdivision. I also pulled the HOA's Articles of Incorporation and the most recent amendment to their covenants. The woman at the counter, a patient gray-haired lady named Shirley, who had helped me with title searches before, raised an eyebrow when she saw the stack of documents I was requesting. "Trouble with the HOA?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. She nodded, like she had heard that answer 1,000 times. "Good luck. Those people think they own the whole county." I spent 3 hours at the library going through every page. My parcel was clearly outside the HOA boundary. The solar field was entirely on my land. The interconnection agreement with the utility company was in my name only. There was no easement, no covenant, no community benefit clause, and no recorded document that gave the HOA any right to access, use, advertise, or sell credits from my solar field. Karen's claim was not just wrong, it was fabricated. I made copies of everything. I put the copies in my folder. Then I drove home and waited. The first escalation came 3 days later. I was in the workshop repairing a transfer switch when I heard a knock on the frame of the open bay door. A man in his mid-30s was standing there, holding one of Karen's green brochures. He looked confused and a little embarrassed. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you the owner of the solar field?" I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over. "I am." He held up the brochure. "I'm Tom Delgado. I live in the Willow Creek subdivision. I signed up for the Sustainability Credit Program last month. Paid the HOA $450 for a year of credits. Karen said it would reduce my electric bill by about 20%. He paused. "My bill came yesterday. It's exactly the same as last month, not a penny lower. I called the utility company and they said they have no record of any credits being applied to my account. They said the solar field at this address is privately interconnected and doesn't feed into any community program." I looked at Tom Delgado's face. He was not angry yet. He was confused, and underneath the confusion, he was starting to feel like he had been taken for a fool. Nobody likes that feeling. "You're right," I said. "The solar field is private, I own it. The HOA has no agreement with me, no access to my meter, and no right to sell credits from my panels. Whatever Karen told you, it wasn't true." Tom stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "She charged me $450. "I know. She charged 17 other households too." "I know." Tom folded the brochure slowly, creasing it down the middle. "I'm going to call her, and then I'm going to call the board treasurer, and then I might call a lawyer." I nodded. "Before you do, can I ask you a favor?" "What?" "Put everything in writing. Every conversation, every charge, every promise. And if you're willing, send me copies. Tom looked at me for a moment, and then something shifted in his expression. He realized I was building a case. He nodded once. I can do that. That evening, I received an email from Tom with screenshots of his payment confirmation to the HOA, a copy of the brochure, and a transcript of his text conversation with Karen from 3 weeks earlier, in which she had explicitly promised that the sustainability credits would reduce his electric bill by 20%. The folder on my desktop was getting thicker. The second escalation came at the end of the week. I was checking the battery storage unit when I heard tires on the gravel, not the quiet crunch of a visitor's sedan, the heavier sound of an SUV, and behind it, another vehicle. I walked around the corner of the inverter shed and saw Karen's white SUV parked next to the folding table, which was still set up at the entrance to the solar field. She was not alone. With her were 2 other people I recognized from HOA board meetings I had attended years ago, back when I was still trying to be neighborly. One was a man named Gerald Fisk, the board treasurer, a retired accountant with a nervous expression and a habit of nodding along with whatever Karen said. The other was a woman named Patricia Morrow, the sustainability chair, who wore hemp clothing and carried a reusable water bottle and had apparently been put in charge of the Green Community Credit Program. They were setting up for another tour. I walked toward them, and this time I did not stop, 50 feet away. I walked right up to the table. Karen, I said, we need to talk. She looked up from her clipboard, and her smile was still in place, but her eyes flicked toward Gerald and Patricia, checking that they were watching. Marcus, good afternoon. We're preparing for the 2 o'clock tour. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing to the board. I've already submitted them in writing, I said. I emailed you, Gerald, and the entire board 3 days ago. I attached my deed, my parcel map, my interconnection agreement, and a letter from my attorney explaining that the HOA has no legal right to access, use, or sell credits from my solar field. None of you responded. Gerald shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Patricia looked at Karen. Karen's smile did not move. The board is reviewing your documentation, she said. These things take time. In the meantime, the program continues. The community is counting on us. I looked at Gerald. You're the treasurer. You've been collecting money from residents for credits that don't exist. Do you understand that what you're doing is fraud? Gerald's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but Karen spoke first. That's a very serious accusation, Marcus. I'd be careful about making threats. It's not a threat, I said. It's a question. Gerald, do you understand that the HOA is selling something it doesn't own? Gerald looked at Karen. Karen looked at me. Patricia looked at her water bottle. Nobody answered. I took out my phone and took a picture of the 3 of them standing behind the table, with the laminated sign and the brochures and my solar panels in the background. Then I said, the 2 o'clock tour is canceled. If anyone sets foot on my property for a tour, I will call the sheriff and report trespassing. If the HOA sells one more credit from my solar field, I will file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office for consumer fraud. And if this table is still here in 1 hour, I will remove it myself and send the HOA a bill for storage. Karen's smile finally cracked. Just a little, just at the corners. You can't do that. The community benefit clause doesn't exist, I said. I've read every page of the HOA covenants. There is no community benefit clause. There is no provision for shared resources. There is no language that gives the board the right to claim private property for sustainability programs. You made it up, Karen. You made it up, and you've been charging people for something you invented. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when a lie runs into a fact and the fact wins. Patricia took a step back from the table. Gerald looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Karen's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Anger, calculation, and then something that looked almost like contempt. We'll see what the board's attorney says, she said. I look forward to it, I said. Make sure he calls my attorney. The number is in the letter. I turned and walked back to my workshop. Behind me, I heard the folding table being collapsed, the brochures being gathered, and the SUV doors closing. The gravel crunched under their tires as they drove away. I sat down at my workbench and added the photograph to my folder. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Diane Okonkwo who specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for being absolutely relentless once she had the facts on her side. I had hired her the day after my first conversation with Karen. They're still selling credits, I told her. I just confronted them at the solar field. Karen is claiming there's a community benefit clause in the covenants. Diane's voice was calm and precise. There isn't. I've reviewed the covenants 3 times. There's no such clause. What else did she say? She said the board is reviewing my documentation. She's stalling. Of course she's stalling. She's trying to figure out how much trouble she's in. Did you get the photograph? Yes. Good. Send it to me. And keep documenting. Every interaction, every email, every tour, every resident who contacts you. We're going to need all of it. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated in ways I had not anticipated. Tom Delgado had not been the only resident who noticed that their electric bill hadn't changed. Word spread through the subdivision, quietly at first, then louder. People started comparing notes. They had all paid between $400 and $500 for a year of sustainability credits. None of them had seen any reduction in their bills. Some of them had called the utility company and received the same answer Tom had. The solar field at my address was privately interconnected, and no credits had ever been applied to any community program. The residents were angry. They started emailing the board. They started calling Karen. They started showing up at board meetings, which Karen had apparently been holding without proper notice, because several residents told me they had no idea when or where the meetings were happening. I received emails from 8 different households, all asking the same questions. Did I own the solar field? Had I ever agreed to participate in the HOA program? Was Karen lying to them? I answered every email the same way. Yes, I own the solar field. No, I never agreed to any HOA program. Yes, Karen is lying to you. And I attached copies of my deed, my parcel map, and my interconnection agreement. The folder on my desktop was now over 100 pages. The third escalation came from an unexpected direction. I was in town picking up supplies when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. I answered, "Mr. Webb, this is Angela Cross. I'm a reporter with the Valley Record. I'm working on a story about green housing initiatives in the county, and I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your solar field." I pulled over to the side of the road. "What kind of questions?" "Well, I attended the Willow Creek HOA Sustainability Town Hall last night. Karen Devereaux gave a presentation about the community solar program. She mentioned your field by address and said it was a model for how private landowners can partner with HOAs to reduce carbon emissions. But when I tried to verify the program with the utility company, they said there was no community program registered at that address. I'm trying to understand the discrepancy." I sat in my truck for a moment, watching the traffic pass. Then I said, "Miss Cross, I think you and I should meet in person. There's a lot you need to know about Karen Devereaux's sustainability program." We met the next morning at a coffee shop in town. Angela Cross was in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a notebook that she filled rapidly as I explained the entire situation. I showed her my deed, my parcel map, my interconnection agreement, and the photographs of Karen's folding table and brochures. I showed her the emails from residents who had paid for credits that didn't exist. I showed her the letter from my attorney. Angela listened without interrupting. When I finished, she closed her notebook and said, "This is not a story about green housing. This is a story about fraud." "Yes," I said, "it is. Will you go on the record?" "Yes." "And will you provide copies of these documents?" "Yes." Angela's story ran 3 days later, on the front page of the Valley Record. The headline read, "HOA Sustainability Program Built on Private Solar Field, Residents Charged for Fake Credits." The article included quotes from Tom Delgado, from 3 other residents, from a utility company representative who confirmed that no community program existed, and from me. It also included a photograph of Karen's folding table, with the laminated sign clearly visible, and a sidebar that reproduced the relevant sections of my deed and the HOA covenants, showing that my property was not inside the HOA boundary. The article did not include a quote from Karen Devereaux, because she had declined to comment. The morning the article came out, my phone started ringing at 7:15 and did not stop for 3 hours. Residents I had never met were calling to ask if they could get their money back. Board members I had never spoken to were calling to ask what they should do. Gerald Fisk, the treasurer, left a voicemail that sounded like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And Karen Devereaux sent me an email. The email was short. It said, "The board will be holding an emergency town hall this Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community center. Your attendance is requested to discuss the sustainability program and resolve any misunderstandings. Please confirm your availability." I forwarded the email to Diane Okonkwo. She called me 5 minutes later. "This is it," she said. "She's going to try to spin this in front of the residents. She'll probably claim it was all a misunderstanding, that the program was well-intentioned, that the board made an honest mistake. You need to be there, and you need to bring someone who can't be spun." "Who?" "The utility company. Call them. Ask if they can send a representative to explain how the interconnection works, and whose meter the credits actually belong to." I called the utility company. The representative I spoke to, a woman named Janelle Harris, who had been helpful during my initial interconnection application years earlier, listened to the situation and agreed immediately. "I've been following this in the news," she said. "I'd be happy to attend. The company has been getting calls from confused residents for weeks. We'd like to set the record straight." Thursday arrived. I drove to the community center at 6:45, parked my truck, and sat in the cab for a few minutes, going through my folder one last time. Deed, parcel map, interconnection agreement, photographs, emails from residents, letter from my attorney, utility company statement. I had everything. The community center was a low building with a gravel parking lot and a sign that said Willow Creek Community Center, available for private events. When I walked in, the room was already crowded. There were folding chairs set up in rows, and most of them were filled. I counted at least 60 people, which was more than I had ever seen at any HOA event. At the front of the room, a long table had been set up, with microphones and water pitchers. Karen Devereaux was already seated at the center of the table, flanked by Gerald Fisk on one side and Patricia Morrow on the other. Two other board members I didn't recognize were also present, looking uncomfortable. Karen was wearing a dark blazer and her expression was composed, professional, almost serene. She looked like a woman who had prepared a narrative and was ready to deliver it. I took a seat in the back row. Janelle Harris from the utility company arrived a few minutes later, wearing her company polo shirt and carrying a folder of her own. She sat down next to me. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready." At exactly 7 o'clock, Karen tapped the microphone and the room quieted. "Good evening," she said. "Thank you all for coming. I know there's been a lot of confusion and concern about the sustainability program, and I want to address everything directly and transparently. The board called this meeting to clear up any misunderstandings and to explain the path forward." She paused, looking around the room with an expression of practiced sincerity. "First, I want to acknowledge that there have been communication issues. The board should have done a better job of explaining how the program works and how the credits are structured. We apologize for any confusion this has caused. The sustainability program was created with the best intentions, to reduce our community's carbon footprint, to promote green energy, and to make Willow Creek a model for sustainable living. The solar field on Marcus Webb's property is an impressive installation, and the board believed that partnering with Mr. Webb would benefit everyone." She paused again, and I saw several people in the audience nodding. She was good at this. She was very good at this. "Unfortunately," Karen continued, "there have been disagreements about the scope of the program and the interpretation of the covenants. Mr. Webb has raised valid concerns, and the board takes those concerns seriously. We are committed to resolving this matter amicably and ensuring that every resident who participated in the program is treated fairly." She looked directly at me, across the room. "Marcus, I want to thank you for bringing your documentation to our attention. The board is reviewing everything carefully, and we hope to reach a resolution that works for everyone." The room was quiet. People were looking at me. I stood up. "Karen," I said, "I appreciate the apology, but I think the residents deserve to understand exactly what happened, not the communication issues, not the misunderstandings, the facts." I walked to the front of the room. I did not sit at the table. I stood to the side, where everyone could see me and the board at the same time. "The facts are these," I said. "My property is not inside the Willow Creek HOA boundary. I have never been a member of the HOA. The solar field was built entirely with my own money, on my own land, and it is connected to my own private meter. The HOA has no legal right to access the field, to advertise the field, or to sell credits from the field. There is no community benefit clause in the HOA covenants. There is no provision for shared resources. The board never contacted me about the program, never asked for my permission, and never had any agreement with me." I paused. The room was completely silent. "Despite all of this," I continued, "Karen Devereaux created a sustainability program that used my solar field as its centerpiece. She printed brochures with my address on them. She set up a table at the entrance to my property and gave tours to residents. She charged 17 households between $400 and $500 each for credits that she had no ability to provide. And when residents noticed that their electric bills hadn't changed, she told them it was a misunderstanding. I turned to look at Karen. Her face was still composed, but her hands were gripping the edge of the table. "That's not a misunderstanding," I said. "That's fraud." A murmur went through the room. Gerald Fisk looked like he was going to be sick. Patricia Morrow was staring at her water bottle like it contained the answers to the universe. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't finished. "I've brought someone who can explain the technical side of this better than I can," I said. "This is Janelle Harris. She's a representative from the utility company. Janelle, can you explain how the solar field is interconnected and whose meter the credits belong to?" Janelle stood up and walked to the front of the room. She was calm, professional, and completely unflappable. "Thank you, Mr. Webb," she said. "I've reviewed the interconnection agreement for the solar installation at Mr. Webb's address. The agreement was signed in 2018, and it establishes a private net metering arrangement between Mr. Webb and the utility company. All power generated by the solar field flows through a single meter, which is registered in Mr. Webb's name and linked to his account. Any surplus power that is fed back into the grid generates credits that are applied exclusively to Mr. Webb's account. There is no mechanism in the agreement for those credits to be transferred, assigned, or sold to any third party, including an HOA or individual residents." She paused, letting that sink in. "I also want to clarify something that several residents have asked about," she continued. "The utility company has no record of any community solar program associated with the Willow Creek HOA. We have received no applications, no agreements, and no documentation from the HOA regarding a shared solar initiative. The credits that residents paid for do not exist in our system. They were never created, never registered, and never applied to any account other than Mr. Webb's." The murmur in the room grew louder. Someone in the back said, "So we paid for nothing?" Janelle nodded. "Based on the information I've reviewed, yes. The credits you purchased were not connected to any actual power generation or utility billing. They appear to have been entirely fictional." The room erupted. People started shouting questions at the board table. Karen was trying to speak into the microphone, but her voice was drowned out. Gerald Fisk had his head in his hands. Patricia Morrow was crying. The two other board members were looking at Karen with expressions of pure betrayal. I stood quietly at the side of the room and watched. I did not need to say anything else. The truth was doing all the work. It took about 10 minutes for the room to quiet down enough for anyone to speak coherently. By that point, several residents had moved to the front of the room and were demanding answers directly from the board. Tom Delgado was among them, and he was not confused anymore. He was furious. "I want my money back," he said, his voice loud enough to carry through the whole room. "All of it, $450, and I want to know where it went." Other residents echoed him. The demand spread through the room like a wave. "Where did the money go? Show us the accounts. Show us the program budget. Show us where the fees went." Gerald Fisk looked up, his face gray. "The funds were deposited in the HOA operating account," he said, his voice barely audible. "They were used for program expenses." "What expenses?" Tom demanded. Gerald didn't answer. Karen finally managed to get control of the microphone. "The funds were used for program administration," she said, her voice tight. "Brochures, signage, the sustainability chair's stipend, and community outreach. The program was always intended to be self-sustaining. The credits were an investment in the future of—" "There are no credits," someone shouted from the back. "The utility company just said so." Karen's composure finally broke. Her face flushed, and for the first time, I saw something underneath the polished surface. It was not remorse. It was not embarrassment. It was rage. She was angry that she had been caught. She was angry that her authority had been challenged. She was angry that the residents were not accepting her narrative. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice rising. "The program was approved by the board. The covenants allow for community sustainability initiatives. Mr. Webb's property may not be inside the HOA boundary, but the solar field provides a clear community benefit, and the board has the authority to." "No," I said. I didn't shout. I just said the word clearly enough that it cut through the noise. The room went quiet again. "The board does not have that authority," I said. "I've read the covenants. I've read the articles of incorporation. I've read every amendment that's ever been recorded. There is no provision that allows the HOA to claim private property for community programs. There is no provision that allows the HOA to sell credits from a private utility account. There is no provision that allows the HOA to charge residents fees for services that don't exist. You made all of this up, Karen. You made it up, and you used your position as president to convince people it was real. I looked at Gerald. You're the treasurer. You signed off on this. You deposited the money. You knew, or you should have known, that the program had no legal basis. I looked at Patricia. You're the sustainability chair. You gave tours of my property without my permission. You handed out brochures with my address on them. You told residents their money was going toward green energy credits that you had no ability to provide. I looked at the other board members. And the rest of you. You voted for this. You approved it. You let it happen. Maybe you didn't know all the details, but you should have asked. You should have checked. You should have read the documents. I turned back to the room. The residents of Willow Creek deserve better than this. They deserve a board that tells the truth. They deserve a board that follows the law. They deserve a board that doesn't steal from them. I picked up my folder and held it up so everyone could see it. Everything I've said tonight is documented. The deed, the parcel map, the interconnection agreement, the emails from residents, the photographs of the tours, the letter from my attorney. If anyone wants copies, I will provide them. If anyone wants to pursue legal action, I will cooperate. And if the board does not refund every penny that was collected under this program, I will file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office and let them sort it out. I put the folder down. The room was silent. Karen was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It might have been hatred. It might have been fear. It might have been the realization that she had finally pushed someone too far. I didn't care which one it was. The town hall ended in chaos. Residents surrounded the board table, demanding refunds and resignations. Gerald Fisk announced that he was stepping down as treasurer, effective immediately. Patricia Morrow fled the room in tears. The two other board members sat in stunned silence while Karen tried to regain control of a situation that was already beyond her. I walked out of the community center and stood in the parking lot, breathing the cool night air. Janelle Harris came out a few minutes later and shook my hand. That was impressive, she said. I've never seen an HOA president unravel like that. She did it to herself, I said. I just let her. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. The Valley Record ran a follow-up story about the town hall, with the headline, HOA President's Solar Program Collapses at Emergency Meeting. The article included quotes from residents, from Janelle Harris, and from me. It also included a statement from the State Attorney General's office, confirming that they had received a complaint and were reviewing the matter. Karen Devereaux resigned as HOA president 3 days after the town hall. Her resignation letter was short and unapologetic, citing personal reasons and the need to spend more time with her family. The board issued a statement promising full refunds to all residents who had purchased sustainability credits, along with a commitment to audit the program's finances and implement new oversight procedures. The refunds arrived over the next month. Tom Delgado sent me an email confirming that he had received his $450, along with a handwritten apology from Gerald Fisk. Other residents sent similar messages. Some of them thanked me. Some of them apologized for not questioning the program sooner. Some of them asked if I would be willing to serve on the board. I declined that last offer politely. The HOA's attorney contacted Diane Okonkwo and proposed a settlement. The HOA would formally acknowledge that my property was outside its jurisdiction, would cease all claims to the solar field, and would pay my legal fees. Diane negotiated the settlement up to include a written admission that the sustainability program had been created without legal authority, and that the board had no right to sell, assign, advertise, or claim my power credits. I framed that admission and hung it on the wall of my workshop, next to the original interconnection agreement. The sustainability program was canceled. The green brochures disappeared. The folding table never reappeared at the entrance to my solar field. And Karen Devereaux moved out of Willow Creek about 6 months later. I heard she relocated to a different county, where she was reportedly trying to join another HOA board. I wished them luck. They were going to need it. The solar field kept running. Every morning, I walked out to check the inverters and watch the panels tilt toward the sunrise. The meter kept spinning backward. The credits kept accumulating in my account. And Elena's array kept doing what I built it to do, making clean energy, saving money, and running quietly under the sun. Some people think authority comes from being loud. Some people think power comes from a title or a clipboard or a laminated sign. But real ownership is quieter than that. It's recorded at the county, It's stamped on a deed. It's wired to a meter that only has one name on it. And no matter how many brochures you print, you can't change whose name that is. I still have the folder. It's in my file cabinet, with all the documents and photographs and emails. I don't look at it often, but sometimes, when I'm sitting on the porch with my coffee and watching the panels catch the first light of morning, I remember the look on Karen's face when Janelle Harris explained whose meter the credits belonged to. That look was worth more than any credit she ever tried to sell.